The invitation came with my name crossed out in red ink, not whited out, not politely omitted, crossed out, like someone had taken a thick red marker and drawn a line through 68 years of being part of this family. 68 years of birthday parties, scraped knees, bedtime stories, and emergency babysitting calls that always started with, "Grandma, can you help us?" I held that invitation in my kitchen for 20 minutes, staring at the elegant script that announced my granddaughter Sarah's wedding to some boy named Marcus I'd met exactly twice. The venue was listed as the Grand View Country Club. The date was circled in my calendar since the engagement announcement 6 months ago. My name, however, had been deemed unnecessary. The phone call came 3 days later. My daughter Linda's voice was tight, practiced, like she'd rehearsed this conversation in the mirror. "Mom, we need to talk about the wedding." I set down my teacup. "What about it?" "Well, we've had to make some difficult decisions about the guest list. You know how expensive these things are." I waited, let the silence stretch. Sometimes silence tells you more than words ever could. "The thing is, we're keeping it small, immediate family only, and with Marcus's family being so large, we just don't have the space." "I'm not immediate family." Another pause. This one sharper. "You know what I mean, Mom. We're talking parents, siblings, the wedding party. That's it." I looked around my living room, at the photo of Sarah in her high school graduation gown. The one where she's hugging me, so tight, my glasses are crooked. At the Christmas ornaments she made me when she was 7, still hanging on my bookshelf 11 months out of the year, because I couldn't bear to pack them away. At the Afghan I'd been knitting for her hope chest, the one that was supposed to be a wedding gift. What about the reception? "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is." That's when I understood. This wasn't about space. This wasn't about money. This was about something else entirely. Something that had been building for months, maybe years. The shortened visits, the forgotten phone calls, the way conversations went quiet when I walked into rooms. I hung up without saying goodbye. Not out of anger, not out of hurt, though both were there. I hung up because I finally understood what I was dealing with, and I needed time to think. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I called my sister Margaret in Phoenix. Margaret, who'd moved across the country after her own family drama, who'd built a new life out of desert dust and sheer determination. "They uninvited you to the wedding?" Her voice crackled through the phone, sharp with disbelief. Crossed my name right off the invitation, in red ink. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What do you do when the family you've spent your entire adult life supporting decides you're no longer necessary? When the granddaughter you've loved since she was in diapers suddenly doesn't need you at the most important moment of her life? "I don't know yet," I said. But that wasn't entirely true. An idea was forming, small and dangerous, in the back of my mind. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and made a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but an accounting. Every birthday party I'd hosted in this house. Every time I'd dropped everything to babysit when Linda had a crisis. Every school play, soccer game, dance recital, where I sat in the audience taking pictures while Linda worked late again. Every Christmas morning, when Sarah ran to my house first, still in her pajamas, to show me what Santa had brought. The list covered 3 pages of my good stationery, 3 pages of memories that apparently didn't earn me a seat at my own granddaughter's wedding. I folded the list carefully and put it in my jewelry box. Next to the pearls, my mother left me. Then I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled out the dress I'd bought for the wedding. Navy blue with tiny silver buttons. Elegant, but not attention-grabbing. The kind of dress that said, "Proud grandmother," without saying, "Look at me." I held it up to the light, checking for wrinkles. It would need to be pressed. Because here's what Linda didn't understand about her mother. Here's what Sarah didn't know about the woman who'd rocked her to sleep 1,000 nights. I wasn't just some old lady who'd fade quietly into the background when dismissed. I was a woman who'd raised 3 children, mostly alone after their father decided family life was too complicated. I was a woman who'd worked 43 years at the phone company, dealing with angry customers and impossible quotas, never missing a day, even when I had pneumonia. I was a woman who'd buried her parents, her husband, and her oldest son, and kept standing. I wasn't the type to disappear, just because it was convenient for everyone else. The Grandview Country Club sat on 40 acres of manicured perfection, 20 minutes outside town. I'd driven past it countless times over the years, admiring the gardens, wondering what kind of people belonged to such a place. Now I was about to find out. I spent the next 2 weeks planning, not plotting, not scheming. Planning. There's a difference. When you plot, you're driven by emotion, by the need to hurt someone back. When you plan, you're driven by purpose. And my purpose was simple. I wanted to see my granddaughter get married. I wanted to witness the moment she promised to love someone forever. I wanted to be present for the beginning of her adult life, even if she'd decided I didn't deserve an invitation to it. I researched the country club like I was writing a term paper. I learned their event schedule, their staff rotations, their security protocols. I studied the layout on their website until I could navigate the building blindfolded. I even called and pretended to be interested in hosting my own event, just to get a tour of the facilities. The woman who showed me around was young, enthusiastic, probably newer to the job than she wanted to admit. She walked me through the main ballroom, pointing out the crystal chandeliers and the wall of windows overlooking the golf course. We host about 2 weddings every weekend during peak season, she explained, her heels clicking on the polished marble floor. The Rosewood Room is our most popular venue for receptions. It holds up to 200 guests. 200 guests. And they couldn't find space for one grandmother. I nodded and smiled and asked appropriate questions about catering packages and flower arrangements. I even took their brochure, as if I were seriously considering spending my retirement savings on a party for people who'd already made it clear I wasn't welcome at theirs. When the tour ended, I shook the young woman's hand and thanked her for her time. Then, I sat in my car in the parking lot for 10 minutes, memorizing the building's entrance points in the flow of foot traffic. Not because I was planning anything dramatic or disruptive, because I was planning to attend my granddaughter's wedding, with or without an invitation. The dress hung in my closet for 2 weeks, pressed and ready. I'd paired it with my pearl necklace and the low heels that wouldn't cause problems if I needed to move quickly. I'd even gotten my hair done, something I usually save for holidays and special occasions, because this was a special occasion, the most special one of my granddaughter's life so far, and I'd be damned if I was going to miss it because Linda had decided I was no longer immediate family. 3 days before the wedding, Sarah called. Her voice was small, uncertain, nothing like the confident young woman I'd watched grow up. "Grandma?" I just wanted to call and say hi. I gripped the phone tighter. "Hello, sweetheart. How are you feeling? Getting excited?" "Yeah, I guess. It's all happening so fast." Sometimes I feel like I can't catch my breath. That's normal, honey. Big changes always feel overwhelming at first. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her sitting in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the chaos of wedding planning and life decisions. Grandma, I wish things were different. 4 words, but they told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't Sarah's choice. This an invitation, this cruel dismissal. It hadn't come from the bride. It had come from someone else, someone who thought they knew what was best for everyone involved. I know, sweetheart. I know you do. I have to go. Marcus is picking me up for dinner with his parents. You have a wonderful time. And Sarah? Yeah, I love you. No matter what happens, I love you. Her voice broke just a little. I love you too, Grandma. After she hung up, I sat very still in my kitchen chair. Outside, the late afternoon sun was slanting through my lace curtains, casting delicate shadows on the wall. The house was quiet, except for the tick of the grandfather clock my husband had bought me for our 25th anniversary. I thought about calling Linda. I thought about demanding an explanation, insisting on my right to be there, making a scene that would force them to include me. But I'd learned something important in my 72 years on this planet, what nobody expects you to do. Linda, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is exactly trip her and manipulate. Sarah expected me to cry. She expected me to guilt and cause family drama that would overshadow the wedding preparations. She expected me to be hurt and bitter and defeated. What she didn't expect was for me to show up anyway. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, the kind of October day that makes you believe in new beginnings. I woke at 5:30, not because my alarm went off, but because my body knew this was important. Some days demand your full attention from the moment you open your eyes. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, watching the sun creep across my backyard. The maple colors, red and gold leaves, dancing in the morning breeze. 22 tree I'd planted when Sarah was born was showing off its fall years. That tree had been growing, same as my granddaughter. Both of them reaching towards something bigger than where they started. By 7, I was in the shower. By 8, I was doing my hair with the hot rollers I'd inherited from my mother. By 9, I was standing in front of my bedroom mirror in my slip, holding that navy dress like it was armor. The woman looking back at me wasn't the defeated grandmother Linda expected to see. My shoulders were straight, my jaw was set, and my eyes had the same determined glint they'd had 40 years ago, when I told my husband's boss exactly what I thought of his suggestion that maybe I should quit working now that we had children. I slipped the dress over my head and buttoned each tiny silver button with steady fingers. The pearls came next, cool against my neck. Then, the earrings my sister had given me for my 60th birthday. Small diamonds that caught the light when I moved my head. In the mirror, I looked like exactly what I was. A woman who belonged at her granddaughter's wedding. A woman who had every right to witness this moment. A woman who wasn't going to let anyone else decide where she did or didn't fit in this family. I ate a light breakfast because nerves in formal dresses don't mix well with full stomachs. Then, I gathered my purse, my car keys, and the small wrapped gift I'd been saving for Sarah. A delicate silver bracelet that had belonged to my grandmother, passed down through 3 generations of women who knew something about loving fiercely and standing your ground. The drive to the country club took 18 minutes. I'd timed it twice during practice runs, accounting for Saturday afternoon traffic and the inevitable slowdown at the main intersection. I parked in the back of the lot, far enough from the main entrance to avoid immediate recognition, close enough to make a dignified approach when the time was right. From my car, I watched the wedding party arrive. Linda first, of course, in a burgundy dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She was directing traffic like a general commanding troops, pointing and gesturing at the photographers, the florists, the young man who was trying to unload what looked like 1,000 white chairs from a delivery truck. Then came the bridesmaids, a flutter of dusty rose silk and nervous laughter. I recognized most of them. Girls who'd grown up in and out of my house, who'd eaten my cookies and borrowed my books and called me Grandma Joyce, even though half of them weren't related to me by anything more than neighborhood friendships. Sarah arrived 20 minutes later in a white limousine that seemed excessive for a 20-minute drive. But I suppose some moments call for unnecessary elegance. Even from a distance, I could see she was radiant. The kind of happiness that makes your whole body glow, that transforms even ordinary moments into something magical. I sat in my car and watched my granddaughter disappear into the country club, surrounded by her bridesmaids and her mother, and what looked like half the women in town. I watched Linda check her watch, smooth her hair, adjust her purse strap in that way she'd done since she was 10 years old, and nervous about something. None of them looked toward the parking lot. None of them wondered if anyone was missing from this perfect picture. At exactly 2:15, I got out of my car. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock, which meant guests would be arriving any minute. I had a narrow window to get inside and find my place before Linda could spot me and cause the scene she'd been trying to avoid. The main entrance was too risky, too much foot traffic, too many opportunities for early detection. Instead, I walked calmly around the side of the building to the service entrance I'd noticed during my reconnaissance tour. It was propped open with a rubber wedge, probably for the catering staff who were rushing in and out with last-minute preparations. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and walked through that door like I owned the place. The key to getting somewhere you're not supposed to be is acting like you belong there. Confidence is the best disguise in the world. The service hallway was chaos. Waiters in crisp white shirts rushing past with trays of champagne glasses. Florists making last-minute adjustments to centerpieces. A woman in a headset speaking rapidly into a microphone about seating arrangements and dietary restrictions. I moved through it all like water, steady and purposeful, but not hurried, just another well-dressed older woman with somewhere important to be. No one questioned me. No one even looked at me twice. The hallway led directly to the main lobby. All marble floors and crystal chandeliers, exactly as I remembered from my tour. Through the tall windows, I could see guests beginning to gather on the terrace where the ceremony would take place. Women in pastel dresses and wide-brimmed hats. Men tugging at their ties and checking their phones. I recognized faces in the crowd. Sarah's high school friends, now young from Linda's street. Co-workers from the insurance professionals with serious expressions and expensive handbags. Neighbor's office, where Linda had worked for 15 years. People who knew me, who'd spoken to me at grocery stores and church functions and community events. People who would recognize me if they saw me. I needed to be smart about this. Strategic. The ceremony seating was arranged in neat rows of white chairs, facing an elaborate archway covered in white roses and trailing greenery. Family seats in the front, friends and acquaintances filling in behind. The mother of the bride would be in the first row on the left, probably already positioned to make her grand entrance when the music started. I couldn't sit in the family section without causing immediate drama, but I didn't need the front row. I just needed to be present, to witness the moment when Sarah promised to love Marcus forever, to see her face when she became a wife. The back row would do just fine. I made my way through the lobby and out onto the terrace, moving with the natural flow of arriving guests. The October air was perfect, warm enough to be comfortable, but cool enough to keep the women from wilting in their formal wear. The string quartet was tuning up in the corner, their soft notes mixing with the gentle murmur of conversation. I found a seat in the very last row, on the far right side, where I'd have a clear view of the ceremony, but remain relatively inconspicuous. The chair next to me was occupied by an elderly man in a navy suit, who nodded politely when I sat down. "Beautiful day for a wedding," he said. "The most beautiful," I agreed. And it was. The gardens were magnificent, all autumn colors and carefully arranged flowers. The archway was like something from a fairy tale. The guests were settling into their seats with that particular kind of anticipation that comes with my purse, and pulled out the small witnessing someone else's happy ending. I opened packet of tissues I'd brought, not because I expected to cry, but because I wanted to be prepared for anything. Then I folded my hands in my lap and waited for my granddaughter to walk down the aisle toward her new life. The music shifted, became more formal, more purposeful, a signal that things were about to begin. Conversations quieted, heads turned toward the back of the terrace, where the bridal party would make their entrance. In the front row, Linda was adjusting her purse strap again, smoothing her dress, checking her watch. She looked nervous, but pleased, the way mothers do when they're about to watch their children reach a major milestone. She hadn't looked back, hadn't scanned the crowd to see who was there and who wasn't. Why would she? As far as Linda knew, everyone who mattered was already accounted for. She had no idea that in the very last row, wearing a navy dress with tiny silver buttons and her grandmother's pearls, sat the one person she'd worked so hard to exclude. The one person who had every right to be there. The one person who wasn't going to miss this moment, invitation or no invitation. The processional began with a single flute, sweet and clear, floating over the assembled guests like a promise. I watched as the first bridesmaid appeared at the back of the terrace, moving with that careful, measured pace that comes from weeks of rehearsal. Dusty rose silk, just as I'd seen from the parking lot, but up close, she looked even younger than I'd remembered. Jessica, I thought, or maybe Jennifer, one of Sarah's college friends who used to come home for holidays and always complimented my apple pie. She was followed by another, then another, 4 bridesmaids in total, each carrying a small bouquet of white roses tied with rose-colored ribbon. They moved like dancers, synchronized and graceful, taking their places at the front of the terrace with practiced precision. The music swelled, became richer, more complex, the moment everyone had been waiting for. Heads turned, conversations stopped completely, and even the elderly gentleman beside me straightened in his chair. And there she was. Sarah appeared at the back of the terrace on the arm of her stepfather, the man Linda had married when Sarah was 12. He looked proud but nervous, probably worried about stumbling or forgetting his cues. Sarah, however, looked luminous. There's no other word for it. Her dress was simple but elegant, fitted at the waist with a flowing skirt that moved like water when she walked. Her veil was long but not elaborate, just a whisper of tulle that caught the afternoon light. But it was her face that took my breath away. Pure joy, the kind of happiness that makes you believe in magic, in fairy tales, in the possibility that sometimes dreams really do come true. She was radiant in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or expensive dresses. She was a woman in love, walking toward her future with complete confidence and trust. I pressed my lips together to keep from making a sound. Not a sob, not a gasp, just the small noise you make when something beautiful catches you off guard and reminds you why certain moments matter more than others. As Sarah walked down the aisle, her eyes swept over the assembled guests, taking in the faces of everyone who'd come to witness this moment. She smiled at her college friends, nodded at her stepfather's family, gave a little wave to her former boss, who was sitting 3 rows up on the left side. Her gaze moved past me without stopping. I was just another face in the crowd, another well-dressed older woman who'd come to see a wedding, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. I could be present without being noticed, could witness this moment without causing the drama Linda had been so determined to avoid. The ceremony itself was traditional but personal. The young pastor spoke about love and commitment, about the courage it takes to promise forever to another person. Marcus, who looked terrified but determined, repeated his vows in a voice that only shook slightly. Sarah's vows were confident, clear, spoken directly to her new husband, like they were the only 2 people in the world. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the assembled guests was spontaneous and joyful. Sarah and Marcus kissed, not the quick peck you sometimes see at weddings, but a real kiss between 2 people who genuinely couldn't wait to start their life together. I applauded with everyone else, clapping until my hands hurt, smiling so wide my cheeks ached. This was why I'd come, not to make a scene, not to prove a point, but to witness this moment, to see my granddaughter become a wife, to be present for the beginning of her adult life, even if she didn't know I was there. As the recessional began and the wedding party made their way back down the aisle, I stayed seated. The smart thing would be to leave now, to slip away before the cocktail hour began, and the crowd thinned enough for Linda to spot me. I'd seen what I came to see. I'd been present for the moment that mattered most, but cocktail hours lead to receptions, and receptions are where the real celebrating happens, where families gather to toast the happy couple, to share stories and memories, to welcome new members into the fold. I thought about the gift in my purse, the silver bracelet that had belonged to my grandmother, passed down through generations of women who knew something about love and loss and standing your ground. Sarah didn't even know it existed, much less that I'd brought it for her. The elderly gentleman beside me stood and offered his arm. "Shall we head to the cocktail hour? I believe they're serving champagne in the garden." I looked at him more closely. Silver hair, kind eyes, the sort of distinguished bearing that comes from a lifetime of good manners and careful attention to others. "Are you family?" I asked. He smiled. "Marcus's great uncle. Drove down from Chicago for the occasion. You?" "Sarah's grandmother." Something shifted in his expression. Not recognition exactly, but understanding. "Ah," he said quietly. "Well then, you definitely shouldn't miss the reception." The cocktail hour was held in the garden behind the main building, a carefully landscaped space with winding paths and strategically placed seating areas. Guests mingled with champagne glasses and small plates of elegant appetizers, the conversation flowing as freely as the wine. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and found a spot near a fountain where I could observe without being too visible. Sarah and Marcus were holding court near the rose garden, surrounded by well-wishers and photographers, capturing every smile, every laugh, every spontaneous moment of joy. Sarah had removed her veil, and her hair was slightly mussed from hugging, but she looked even more beautiful than she had walking down the aisle. Marriage, even one that was only 20 minutes old, seemed to suit her. I watched Linda working the crowd like the experienced hostess she'd always been, introducing Marcus's family to Sarah's friends, making sure elderly relatives had places to sit, coordinating with the photographers to ensure every important moment was captured. She was in her element, the mother of the bride orchestrating a perfect celebration for her daughter. She still hadn't noticed me. Why would she? I was just another guest in a sea of navy dresses and pearls, another older woman sipping champagne and admiring the bride. As long as I stayed on the periphery, kept moving when conversations got too personal, I could probably make it through the entire evening without detection. The dinner bell chimed at 6:30, a gentle signal that it was time to move into the Rosewood Room for the reception proper. I followed the flow of guests through the French doors that opened from the garden into the main building, keeping my head down and my pace casual. The Rosewood Room was transformed. What had been an elegant but empty space during my tour was now a wonderland of soft lighting, floral arrangements, and tables set with china that probably cost more per place setting than I spent on groceries in a month. The head table was positioned at the front of the room, elevated slightly, so the wedding party would be visible to all the guests during dinner and toasts. I found my way to one of the round tables in the back, the kind of spot usually reserved for distant relatives and family friends who needed to be included but weren't part of the inner circle. Perfect for my purposes. The other seats at my table were occupied by people I didn't recognize, probably colleagues of Marcus's parents or old family friends who'd driven in from out of town. The woman to my right introduced herself as Marcus's aunt from Milwaukee. The couple across from me were longtime friends of the groom's family. Everyone was pleasant, making the kind of polite small talk that fills the space while you wait for the real celebration to begin. "And how do you know the happy couple?" Marcus's aunt asked, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision. "I'm Sarah's grandmother," I said, taking a small sip of wine. "Oh, how lovely. You must be so proud. She's absolutely radiant tonight." "She is indeed. And Marcus seems like such a nice young man. They met in college, didn't they?" I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure. Sarah's life had become increasingly distant from mine over the past few years, filtered through Linda's updates and the occasional phone call that felt more obligatory than genuine. There were gaps in my knowledge of my granddaughter's life, holes that widened every time Linda decided I didn't need to be included in some family gathering or celebration. The toast began after the main course was cleared. Marcus's best man went first, telling stories about college pranks and late-night study sessions, painting a picture of a young man who was loyal, funny, and completely devoted to his new wife. Sarah's maid of honor followed, sharing memories of shopping trips and movie nights, and the phone call when Sarah first mentioned a boy named Marcus, who made her laugh until her sides hurt. Then it was time for the parents to speak. Marcus's father stood first, welcoming Sarah into their family. With words that were simple but sincere, he spoke about watching his son grow from a boy who collected baseball cards into a man who'd found his perfect match. He raised his glass and toasted to love, to new beginnings, to the joy of watching your children find their own happiness. Linda rose next, elegant in her burgundy dress, comfortable with the microphone and the attention. She'd always been good at public speaking, confident in front of groups, in a way I'd never been. She thanked Marcus's family for raising such a wonderful son, praised the wedding vendors for creating such a beautiful celebration, and spoke about watching Sarah grow from a little girl who insisted on wearing princess dresses to the grocery store into a confident young woman ready to start her own family. Her speech was polished, heartfelt, everything a mother's wedding toast should be. She spoke about Sarah's childhood, her accomplishments, her dreams for the future. She welcomed Marcus into the family and promised that he'd gained not just a wife, but an entire network of people who would love and support them both. What she didn't mention was the family that had loved and supported Sarah long before Marcus came along. The grandmother who'd been there for first steps and first words, for bedtime stories and scraped knees, for high school graduation and college orientation. The woman who'd been crossed off the guest list like an afterthought, but who was sitting 30 feet away, listening to every word. As Linda raised her glass for the toast, her eyes swept across the room, taking in the faces of all the guests who'd come to celebrate her daughter's wedding. Her gaze moved past my table without stopping, but something made her look back. A double take, the kind of delayed recognition that happens when your brain processes something your eyes weren't expecting to see. Our eyes met across the crowded room. For a moment that felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. Linda's champagne glass was frozen halfway to her lips, her carefully rehearsed composure cracking just slightly around the edges. I could see the exact moment when shock gave way to calculation, when she realized that her carefully orchestrated celebration had been infiltrated by the one person she'd worked so hard to exclude. I lifted my own glass in a small salute, not mocking, not triumphant, just acknowledging. I was here. I'd witnessed the ceremony, enjoyed the dinner, listened to the toasts. I'd done exactly what she'd tried to prevent me from doing, and I'd done it without causing a scene or disrupting the celebration. Linda's face flushed slightly, but she recovered quickly. She finished her toast with the same polished delivery, thanked everyone for coming, and sat down to enthusiastic applause. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile became more forced, the quick glance she shot toward her husband across the head table. The music started, a signal that the dancing portion of the evening was about to begin. Sarah and Marcus took the floor for their first dance, a slow, romantic song that had probably taken them weeks to choose. They moved together like they'd been dancing for years, comfortable and natural, lost in each other and the moment. Other couples joined them gradually. Parents, grandparents, wedding party members swaying to the gentle rhythm. The lights dimmed slightly, creating an intimate atmosphere that made the whole room feel warmer, more personal. I watched from my table, content to observe this tradition from a distance. Dancing had never been my strong suit, even when my husband was alive and patient, enough to guide me through the basic steps at our own wedding reception 48 years ago. But then Marcus broke away from Sarah and walked toward the edge of the dance floor, extending his hand to an elderly woman I recognized as his grandmother. She protested, laughing and shaking her head, but he persisted with the kind of gentle insistence that comes from genuine affection. Finally, she allowed him to help her to her feet and escort her onto the floor for a slow, careful dance that had half the room reaching for their phones to capture the sweet moment. Sarah watched them with tears in her eyes, then turned and began scanning the room, looking for someone. Her gaze moved across the tables, past the other guests, searching for a familiar face in the crowd. She was looking for me. Not consciously, maybe. Not with the specific thought that her grandmother might be hidden somewhere in the back of the room, but with the instinctive understanding that something was missing from this perfect celebration. Someone who should be here, who belonged in this moment, who deserved to dance with the bride at her own wedding reception. Sarah's search became more deliberate, more focused. She stepped away from the dance floor, moving between tables with the kind of purposeful movement that suggested she knew exactly who she was looking for. Her wedding dress rustled softly as she navigated around chairs and guests, her face lit by the warm glow of the chandeliers overhead. I could have stayed seated, could have kept my head down, finished my wine, and slipped out during the next song, when everyone's attention was focused on the dance floor. That would have been the smart thing, the safe thing, the thing that would have avoided the confrontation Linda was probably already planning in her head. But watching Sarah search for me, seeing that lost expression cross her face when she couldn't find what she was looking for, I realized something important. This wasn't just about my right to be here anymore. This was about Sarah's right to have everyone who loved her witness the most important day of her life. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my dress, checking that my pearls were straight. The elderly gentleman who'd sat beside me during the ceremony caught my eye and nodded slightly, as if he understood exactly what I was about to do and approved completely. Sarah was 3 tables away when she spotted me, her face transformed, confusion giving way to recognition, then to pure, unfiltered joy. She didn't walk toward me. She ran, as much as anyone can run in a wedding dress and heels, her face lighting up like Christmas morning. "Grandma," she breathed when she reached me, throwing her arms around my neck with the same enthusiasm she'd shown as a little girl. "You're here. You're actually here." I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her perfume, mixed with the faint smell of hairspray and wedding flowers. "Of course I'm here, sweetheart. I wouldn't miss this for anything. But Mom said you couldn't come. She said there wasn't room, that it was too expensive, that—" Sarah pulled back to look at me, her eyes bright with tears she was trying not to shed. "How are you here?" "Sometimes grandmothers find a way," I said simply. "You look absolutely beautiful, Sarah. More beautiful than I ever imagined you could look." She laughed, a sound that was half joy, half relief. I kept thinking something was missing. The whole day, I felt like someone important wasn't here. And it was you. It was always you. Over Sarah's shoulder, I could see Linda approaching. Her face was a carefully controlled mask, but I could read the fury in her eyes, the way her jaw was set, the measured pace that meant she was trying very hard not to make a scene in front of 200 guests. "Sarah, honey." Linda's voice was sweet enough to cause diabetes, but there was steel underneath. "I see you found your grandmother. How surprising." Sarah's arms tightened around me protectively. "Mom, why didn't you tell me Grandma was coming? I've been worried about her all day. We need to discuss this privately," Linda said, her smile never wavering, even though her words were clipped. "This isn't the time or place." "You're absolutely right," I said, before Sarah could respond. "This isn't the time or place for family drama. This is the time and place for celebrating your daughter's wedding, which is exactly what I'm here to do." The 3 of us stood there in a triangle of tension, while couples swayed around us on the dance floor, and guests at nearby tables pretended not to notice the family conference happening in their midst. Sarah looked back and forth between her mother and me, clearly trying to understand the undercurrents she could feel, but couldn't quite interpret. "Grandma," she said finally, "would you like to dance?" It wasn't really a question. It was a choice, a declaration, a 22-year-old woman deciding that her wedding day was going to include everyone who mattered to her, regardless of what anyone else had planned. I looked at Linda, who was still smiling, that terrifying smile. "I think that would be lovely." Sarah took my hand and led me onto the dance floor, where other couples made room for us with the kind of automatic politeness that happens at formal events. The song was soft, something contemporary that I didn't recognize, but the rhythm was gentle enough for my 72-year-old knees to manage. We swayed together slowly, grandmother and granddaughter, while photographers captured the moment and guests smiled approvingly from their tables. Sarah kept looking over my shoulder toward where Linda stood at the edge of the dance floor, her expression unreadable. "Grandma, are you in trouble?" Sarah whispered. "Probably," I admitted, "but some trouble is worth it. I missed you so much today. When I was getting ready, I kept thinking about all the times you helped me with my hair when I was little, and during the ceremony, I looked for you in the audience, but I couldn't see you. I was there, back row, right side. I saw everything. You were radiant, sweetheart, absolutely radiant." The song ended, but Sarah didn't let go of my hand. Instead, she guided me toward the head table, where Marcus was talking with his best man. When he saw us approaching, his face broke into a genuine smile. "Marcus," Sarah said, "I'd like you to meet my grandmother, the one I've told you so much about." Marcus extended his hand, then seemed to think better of it, and pulled me into a warm hug instead. "Mrs. Henderson, it's such an honor to finally meet you properly. Sarah talks about you all the time. All good things, I hope. The best things. She says you taught her how to make the perfect chocolate chip cookies, and that you're the only person who never gets tired of her stories." I glanced at Sarah, who was beaming. "Well, good stories never get old. Would you mind if I stole a dance with my new grandmother-in-law?" Marcus asked, offering his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. Before I could answer, Linda appeared beside us. She'd composed herself during the few minutes I'd been dancing with Sarah, and now she looked like the perfect mother of the bride again. Gracious, elegant, completely in control. "Mom," she said, "we really need to talk, privately." "After I dance with Marcus," I said firmly. "A bride's grandmother has certain privileges, and dancing with the groom is one of them." Marcus looked between his new wife and mother-in-law, clearly sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. "It would be my pleasure," he said diplomatically. Linda's smile became even more fixed. Of course, House Silly stood there watching as Marcus led me onto the dance floor, her presence a constant reminder that this conversation was only postponed, not canceled. Marcus was a better of me. "Please, don't let me interrupt." But she didn't move away. She dancer than I'd expected, patient and careful with my slower steps. "Sarah's been worried about you," he said quietly as we moved to the music. "She's been asking about you for months, wondering why you weren't involved in the wedding planning. What did she think the reason was? She thought maybe you were sick, or that you were upset about something. She kept asking her mother if she should call you directly. But Linda always said she'd handle it, that you were fine, just busy." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I'd had when I realized Linda had been filtering my relationship with Sarah, controlling the flow of information in both directions. I wasn't sick. And I wasn't busy. Marcus nodded slowly. I didn't think so. You don't seem like the type to miss something this important, unless someone prevented you from being here. You're a perceptive young man. I have 4 sisters and a very complicated family. I recognize the signs of family politics when I see them. The song ended, and Marcus escorted me back to where Sarah was waiting. She immediately took my arm, as if she was afraid I might disappear again if she didn't maintain physical contact. Grandma, you have to see the cake. It's 3 layers with real flowers, and the top layer is the same flavor as your chocolate cake recipe, I insisted. Sarah, Linda's voice cut through the celebration like a blade. I need to speak with your grandmother. Now. The word now hung in the air between us, loaded with 20 years of accumulated resentment and the kind of authority Linda still expected to wield over everyone in her orbit. But this wasn't her house, and I wasn't her child anymore. Actually, I said, I'd love to see the cake first, and meet some of Sarah's college friends, and maybe have another glass of that excellent champagne. Sarah squeezed my arm gratefully. Yes, let's do all of that. Mom, can't this wait? It's my wedding day. For a moment, Linda looked like she might explode right there on the dance floor. Her careful composure cracked just enough to show the fury underneath, the realization that her control over the situation was slipping away with every minute I remained at the reception. Fine, she said through gritted teeth, but we are going to discuss this before you leave tonight. I wouldn't dream of leaving without saying goodbye properly, I replied, and I meant it, not because I was afraid of Linda's anger, but because I had no intention of letting this moment end the way so many others had, with me being dismissed, sent away, told I wasn't needed or wanted. Tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, at my granddaughter's wedding reception, surrounded by family and friends, celebrating the beginning of Sarah's new life. The invitation might have had my name crossed out in red ink, but I was here anyway, and I wasn't leaving until I was good and ready. Sarah led me through the reception, like a tour guide showing off her favorite museum exhibit. She introduced me to her college roommates, her co-workers from the marketing firm, where she'd landed her first real job, the bridesmaids I'd watched from afar, but never properly met. Each introduction was the same. This is my grandmother, the one I told you about. And each time, the response was warm, genuine, exactly what you'd expect when meeting someone's beloved family member. What struck me wasn't their politeness. It was their familiarity. These young women knew who I was. They'd heard stories, seen pictures, been told about the grandmother who made the best chocolate chip cookies and always remembered birthdays with handwritten cards. I existed in Sarah's world in ways I'd never realized, mentioned in conversations I'd never been part of, remembered in moments I'd never witnessed. Your grandmother sounds amazing, one of the bridesmaids said to Sarah. The way you talk about her, I always pictured her at every family gathering. Sarah's smile faltered just slightly. She usually is. She's the heart of everything we do. The lie came so naturally, so smoothly, that I wondered if Sarah had been telling it for months, protecting me from awkward questions about why I wasn't at bridal showers or dress fittings, explaining away my absence from wedding planning sessions and family dinners, creating a version of our relationship that existed only in her imagination, where grandmothers were always included and always wanted. We made our way to the cake table, where a masterpiece of buttercream and fondant waited to be admired. 3 tiers, decorated with cascading sugar flowers that looked real enough to fool bees. The bottom layer was vanilla with raspberry filling. The middle was lemon with cream cheese frosting. And the top, as Sarah had promised, was chocolate with the rich ganache filling I'd perfected over decades of birthday cakes and holiday desserts. "I gave the baker your recipe," Sarah said, running her finger along the edge of the table. She said it was the most detailed cake recipe she'd ever received. 3 pages of instructions for something most people do in a paragraph. "Good chocolate cake can't be rushed," I said. "Your great-grandmother taught me that. She said baking was like love. If you tried to take shortcuts, people could always taste the difference." Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. "I wanted you to make it. The wedding cake. I asked Mom if we could have you make it instead of hiring someone. But she said it was too much work for you, that we shouldn't put that kind of pressure on family." Another lie. Another decision made for me. About me, without me. I'd made wedding cakes for 3 of Linda's friends over the years, spent weekends in my kitchen, creating 3-tier masterpieces, because I enjoyed the challenge, and they appreciated the personal touch. Linda knew I would have loved nothing more than to make Sarah's wedding cake, to spend weeks planning and testing flavors, to create something that would sit at the center of this celebration. But that would have required admitting I was part of the celebration in the first place. "Well," I said, reaching for 2 small plates from the stack beside the cake, "I suppose we'll have to settle for being the first to taste it. Grandma, we can't cut the cake yet. That's supposed to happen later with Marcus, with the whole ceremony." I looked around the reception hall. Guests were mingling, dancing, enjoying themselves in that relaxed way that happens when the formal portions of an event are finished, and people can simply celebrate. The evening was winding toward its natural conclusion, but slowly, without any sense of urgency. "1 tiny piece," I said, picking up the cake server that lay beside the tower of sweetness. Just to make sure it turned out right. Quality control. Sarah giggled, a sound I hadn't heard from her in years. Not the polite laugh she used in conversations with adults, but the genuine, slightly mischievous giggle of the little girl who used to sneak cookies from my kitchen counter while I pretended not to notice. "You're terrible," she said, but she was already reaching for a fork. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is exactly what nobody expects. Linda expected me to stay home, to accept that crossed-out invitation, to fade quietly into the background like a good, dismissed grandmother should. Instead, I showed up. I witnessed every moment that mattered. I danced with my granddaughter on her wedding day, met her new husband properly, and reminded everyone present that family isn't defined by who gets invited. It's defined by who shows up when it matters most. Love doesn't need an invitation. It just needs courage.